Rabbi, we have another question ready for you, and I'd like to remind our viewers that not one of the questions is known by the Rabbi in advance. The conditions are disadvantageous and not in his favor, but we stick to them. The question is this: Rabbi, what is your attitude toward equality between men and women and feminism?
I think that in some respects, Judaism of the Second Temple gave Jewish women the rights that the majority of surrounding nations didn't have, particularly the famous marriage contracts that by all means had to be composed.
That is ketubah, right?
Ketubah. The wife's interests were by all means accommodated. This was something special. Of course. If we read the Torah, we can see that in the most ancient foundations of the biblical faith, many commandments accommodate the rights of women. In fact, for most Gentile nations, that didn't make any sense. But the New Covenant faith was initially purely Jewish. Later, it reached those Gentiles that turned to the God of Israel. This New Covenant faith became another step forward, ensuring, if not complete equality, then equality between men and women in most areas. If we read, say, chapter 7 of 1 Corinthians, that's a wonderful declaration. Wonderful declaration of equal rights of men and women for each other in matrimony, equal obligations, equal responsibilities, even where a force majeure like a divorce happens. I think that this spiritual declaration is simply amazing. It gave women absolute, unique, special rights. If we look at the situation in different Orthodox Judaism movements, we will see that only a man has the right to file for a divorce. I mean, that, sure enough, women can turn to their husbands under some particular circumstances. A woman can, for example, ask the rabbi to talk to her husband, but she has no right to divorce her husband, no matter what happens. However, a man can. Moreover, it's downright unnecessary to have some justified reasons for that. But we are aware of the situation in many Christian denominations. Also, we understand that in this regard, the New Covenant ensured equal rights between men and women. While the man remains the head of the family, that, of course, is a restriction, a sound and sensible biblical restriction. It does bring balance and helps the New Covenant Jewish congregations, New Covenant congregations and churches in general, to keep this sound, moderate approach regarding the rights of men and women and their reciprocal obligations and status in a congregation. When we look at the possibilities for women to express themselves in a New Covenant congregation, it's a very dangerous thing to take some scripture passages out of context and use them to develop certain theories that culminated in strict boundaries in women's ministry.
For example, are women allowed to preach off a pulpit?
Yes, this is a kind of speculation. Of course, a vivid example. A woman, let she keep silent in the congregation. Very well, but if we don't understand what this passage is really about, we could turn this decree into an absolute law and get our wires crossed. Because in that same epistle there are clear references to the order in which a woman can prophesy for all of the congregation. In other words, it's absolutely clear that in this case, she won't just be speaking, she will be a mouthpiece of God that every single person, including the congregation and the leadership, will have to heed to. Well, that's one of the examples. I'm not going to mention the other ones. With that said, we must understand what great improvements the Lord made in the New Covenant to the rights of women inside the family, inside God's congregation. But it's never the case with God when rights are improved and the responsibility remains the same or narrows down. So for this reason, a woman's responsibility in her family and the congregation also becomes significantly improved. Now the question is this: how would she react to this? I mean, women in general. To what degree is she ready to bear this improved responsibility, greater responsibility? To the degree she's ready, to the same degree she can use her rights, and it's the same for men. Rights and authority, they are given according to responsibility. That's why if we talk about feminism, that basically insists on women being better than men. That everything men have, women should also have. That's of course a distortion of God's image. It's an attempt to eliminate that inherent difference that was, is, and will be in the purpose of men and women, in the role of men and women, in the ministry of men and women, in the responsibility that men and women have, and the responsibility of men and women in this earthly life. I believe that feminism is a type of distortion that, exegetically speaking, interlocks with replacement theory, a theory that Israel has been replaced by the church. This may raise some eyebrows, but basically it says that Christian feminism exists as well. It's based on the same passage. There's neither Jew nor Greek. There's neither male
nor female.
So, in defiance of facts, in defiance of reality, some insist that there's absolutely no difference between men and women whatsoever. Women can do absolutely everything that men can. They can even call women to desire to do absolutely everything that men do. Insisting on an almost literal interpretation of the passage taken out of context. In the same way, a more classic theology, exegetics, basically ignored a whole bunch of scripture passages in the contexts of this passage as well.
Very clear and obvious ones.
And insisted that it was a done deal. Now there's absolutely no difference between Greeks and Jews. In other words, between Gentiles and Jews. By flesh, there's no difference whatsoever. As we see in the history of the church, this total equality in all respects. Total, you could say, indifferent equality in all respects. With time, leads to Gentile believers looking down on believing Jews. I mean that in many traditional churches, Jews who believed in Jesus Christ acquired a status of second-class believers. It was extremely discernible in the history of Catholic churches in many countries, in the history of some Catholic countries as well. For example, we know that in Spain, in order for some faithful Catholic believers to take up whatever position in a church, he had to prove that there were no Jews in 4 generations of his lineage. If we talk about the Russian Orthodox Church, I will give you one of the most common Russian sayings. A baptized, dirty Jew is the same as a forgiven thief. So in the same manner, feminism began insisting that women are better than men, women are better than men. We all know what extremes are now resulting from that. I'm not even going to mention it. So there.